Hello again, this is John Adams, and this is the second section of creating a master image using Photoshop. One thing that we did not talk about on the last section tutorial, the first tutorial that I created, is that going through the procedure, there's number one is check the scanned or digital quality of the image. Number two, crop the image to the desired size. And then three, for some reason I skipped this part, is to create duplicate of the original image. I went right ahead into remove defects. So I want you to get used to creating a duplicate image when you first start. I think it's much better if you do it in the very beginning because you'll do like I did and you'll forget what to do and when to create that duplicate image, and you'll be down the road doing all these different things to your image, and you won't have the original to go back to, so you can see where you started and then where you're at that specific moment. So it's a great way to do comparisons, but it's also a great way to save your original image in case you've done something to it that you really don't want to. Specifically if you are going in and making modifications to your image. So I'll show you how to create this duplicate image real quick, and that's very simple to do. So if you right click on the background layer, just click on here, and you can go to duplicate layer, and it'll create a duplicate layer. You can name it a different name if you would like to. I'm just going to leave it as copy of the background because that doesn't really matter, and when I see copy I'll know that that's the one that I'm using. Also, if you were doing this at another time with another file open, you can save it to another file. There's other things that I have open, or you can create a new file that you can save that duplicate in. So I want to keep it in the adjustments layer summer 2017 JPEG is the one that the image that I'm working on. So I'm just going to go ahead and say okay, and when I create it, we have an image on top of a copy of our background over the top of the original image. So this is the original right here. Photoshop always names it background on your image when you first open it, and it also locks it. So it locks it into place so you can't move it around, so you can't change things on it, and because it's thinking that you're a beginning Photoshop student or a student that may not want to move that image around, and it does create problems if it's not locked into place. So we'll see that later when we're creating selections and so on. But for example, if for some reason I'm going to turn this off, you can't really tell the difference because they're exactly the same. But if I click on this layer, the background layer, and I go to my paintbrush and I have black loaded, I can paint around, whatever I want. I can modify this. But if this was the only image we had, or only copy, we would have to go back and reload it, or go back in the history and redo it, and which takes time, and it's not as convenient. So it's always better to make a duplicate image. So you can see what happens if I turn on the duplicate over the top of it, the copy. It just covers it up because it works just like a sandwich. The top one covers whatever's below it. So if this is just another image, or an image with a selected image of just an object or this person, it would work differently. But because this is a complete duplicate, it covers everything up. So don't get confused when you have these on and off. Make sure that you're working in the duplicate or the copy layer, and you can call it duplicate if you want to. But let me show you another thing too, is if we turn this off, if we have our history palette open, and if you don't have it open, you can go under Window, go to History, and click on the History palette, and it will open up if it's not already in your panels on the right hand side. But you can see some of the things I've been doing today. I've been playing around and making tutorials, so I have a lot of things that I'm doing. But you can see all the way to the top, this is the original image where I first started. So you can always click on that and it goes back to where I first started. So here's the image without the duplicate, and it goes back step by step. So this is the brushing or painting that I did. Now if I step back one step, I'll go back to here. This is before I painted it, which is exactly what I wanted. So the history palette is really good. The other way to undo things is to use the Command Z, or the Command Option Z will go back multiple steps. You'll try to go back if with Command Z as a keyboard shortcut, or you can go under Edit, Undo, and it will work the same way, but it shows the shortcut up there also. I would like you to get used to using Command Z, and that's the command key. If you're working at home on a Windows computer, it's Control Z, so it's a little bit different. I'm working on a Mac, so it will be a little bit different than yours. Most of the commands, where it says Command for and another key, it's just the Control key for Windows computers, and it'll state that in the textbook as well. So now I've gone back to this, I'm going to go ahead and pull this history palette out of the way so it's not in the way of what we're doing. And then we're going to make sure, I'm going to turn this back on, this top layer, and make sure that I'm in that layer. So when it's highlighted, that means I'm in that layer. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to make some levels adjustments to it. So I pulled the adjustments palette out over here on the left hand side, and you can do this too by just clicking on the tab and pulling it out and putting it wherever you want. If it's not located on the right hand side, you can always go under Window and in the menu and find adjustments in there, and it will open up for you. So, and then you can move it wherever you want to move it. So in the adjustments palette, or adjustments layers palette, we have a whole bunch of different things that we can do, or adjustments that we can make. The first one is the one that looks like a sun, is brightness and contrast, and sun's kind of a good symbol for that. The second one is levels, so it looks like levels, peaks and levels within a graph. And then the third one is curves, and it looks like a grid with a curve inside the grid. The next one is exposure, plus and minus. The other one is vibrance, and the V for vibrance. Hue and saturation, you know, it's kind of like a color hue and saturation you used to see on adjusting TVs. Then there's color balance, which has the balance symbol. Black and white, which we're really not going to be using in this class, and the photo filter, which it shows a camera with a little lens or filter on it. We'll be using that off and on. Color, or the channel mixer, so it's the RGB colors blending together even though it's not in color. And then the color lookup. So these others are different ones. We're not going to be using these down at the bottom. We're just going to be using the ones in the first two rows. But for this exercise, instead of using brightness and contrast is a little more basic. So I'll click on this just to show you what it looks like. So color and balance only has two sliders, and it only has brightness and contrast. So it can work, but what happens is if you start with this, most students overuse it and get the brightness too bright or the contrast too dark, or one of those options. So what I like to do, instead of starting with brightness and contrast, I like to start with levels instead. So if you do this accidentally, you get into one of these other levels, just make sure that you get rid of it if you're not using it. So say for example, you can right click on it and you can delete the layer, or my favorite is just clicking on it and dragging it to the trash, and then it gets rid of it. So now I'll go to levels, and notice properties panel stays open, and you can see the highlights in here. So when you're looking at the histogram, you can see the peak here, you can see the small peaks in here, which is okay. What this is telling you is that in this light brightness area, and you'll see the slider, it's a white slider, a gray slider, and a black slider. So this is highlights, midtones, and shadows. So in the highlights area, there's hardly any information, but it really peaks right in the midtone areas. We want to spread this graph out, or this histogram out. We want to move it over so it kind of fills up this this area more evenly. So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to go to the highlight slider right here, and we want to hold the options key down and click and drag the slider. So when you do this, what it does is it shows you where the color clipping is, and it shows you where your highlight is. So you see that white area that's showing up on the edge of his shirt? That's the highlight, the highest, the brightest spot in the image. Now we want to do the same thing for the shadows. So with the shadows, we're going to hold down the option key and click and drag this over. So we don't want too much, because if you pull this over too much, everything will be too contrasty, you can see on here. But we do want to have some shadows. So right in there looks pretty good. So this is just adjusting very basic levels adjustments, and we'll get into using curves later, which is more specific. But for this exercise, I just want you to use the levels. Now the other slider, the Midtone slider, is right here. So if you go to the right, it's going to get dark. To the left, it gets lighter. So you can see if you go too far, you're going to have a gray, blah sky, and you're going to lose all your color. So you kind of find a happy medium. This is too dark, and maybe that's too light, so you kind of get in between. And you can see there's kind of a mid-tone area in here. So you can see by turning this on and off where we've come from and where we're at right now. So that gives you a good idea, and that's what we use the little eye and the layers for. So the next thing that we want to do is we're going to I'll go ahead and show you how to use the curves, but before we do that, there's a couple more things I need to show you about levels. So with levels, and which is in one of the other tutorials also that I discuss levels, you can see that we're in the RGB mode right now, which is all the 3 colors that we're using for this image. And if you click on this, you can see that you can get into the red, the green, and the blue. So one of the areas that we need to take a look at is that it's possible that one of those colors is more than the other. So I'm just going to minimize this for a second. I'm going to bring in, now under Windows, if you want to get the info palette out, you don't have to for this, but it's a good idea. We're going to be using this in the more advanced adjustments using curves. But for this, if you look in here, if we move our cursor, in this case I have the brush, but I'll use the move tool because it has a pointer. If I move my pointer over the area where I had that super bright highlight, in the curves we'll be setting a sampler for this, but for right now we're just going to take a look at the color ranges. So I'm looking at the numbers on the RGB and info palette on the right hand side of the of where it says RGB, and it says 252, 255, 255, so we're really close. So it means that the red is a little bit lighter than the green and the blue, so it means that we have a little bit of shift in color, that we have more green and blue there, slightly more, which is not much. When we do the advanced settings, we'll go ahead and make those, even those colors or those ranges out a little bit better. Also for the dark or black area, if you move down here, you'll see that it's going into 0, 1, 12. So that means that the red is very low in value. The green is a little bit higher, but the blues, it's color cast in the blue range. So we want to level that out too. So we want to level it out for the highlights and shadows. So what we're going to do, I'm going to pull this out of the way for now, and then we're going to go ahead and use go back to levels. Now if you've gone away from your levels, all you need to do is just double click on the icon here for levels again, and the properties will show up, and you can pull your properties panel over a little bit. So if you want to, we can adjust different channels, color channels in here. Here's red. So if we want to adjust the red, now I suggest when you're using levels, just go ahead and use the the midtones area for this, and you can see your picture will get a lot redder if you go to the left and a lot bluer if you go to the right. So you need some happy medium. So there's really not much adjustments on the red I want to do on this. The green, there's probably hardly any. The only green in the picture is right here, so I probably don't need to do much to it, because if I increase or decrease the green, it's going to get redder. So I want to go back. So I don't really need to change that to get it to look right, and I think the only area that we really need to work with is the blue. So in the blue, we can cut back a little bit on the blue, or actually more blue is to the left, less blue and green is to the right. So you can get that a little bit closer. So I cut down a little bit more, on the actual blue itself. Actually increase the blue slightly. So if we move our marker over it, now we see with the info palette. Now this may not be the best, but for visual purposes right now, that's really where we want this to be. But if we bring the info palette down, you can see that we've increased the blue quite a bit in the dark and the shadows, but nothing in the highlights. So, and that's not necessarily a problem, because we're not changing it elsewhere at this time. Okay, so that's one way you can make adjustments to the specific colors in levels. It works a lot better if you're using curves. We can make a lot more corrections and revisions in there. But the best one to use for color is usually hue and saturation, and then color balance. So if we go to hue and saturation, you can see that we have here where it says master, there's a dialog box here where we have a lot more colors to choose from, and we can cut back on certain things. Like we can go into the red, and normally what I do is I cut back on the saturation. So I'll cut back on the saturation of the red, and you can see if I zoom in on his face, it's starting to look a lot better. It was back there, and you can see the red on there, and then as I pull it less saturation, you can see instead of being sunburnt, he looks like he's got much better color in his face, and now he looks like he's got fairly white legs, which is probably normal. People that wear pants most of the time and don't wear shorts. So you can do that. You can also bring up the brightness, lightness, or darkness in the reds, but it doesn't really look like it needs that, so I'm going to go back to 0. I'm just using the Command Z to go back. Now if you start moving the hue and saturation, you'll see that it's going to change your picture quite a bit more than you want, and you can see in here that's changing the colors, making it look more green, and in here it's getting into the green also, but this is actually more blue. It looks yellow in the image, so it's kind of creating the opposite. So it's really hard to get that exactly right, so I usually stay out of the actual hue settings on here. And but if you do want to go into specific areas, you can change other areas. Like if you wanted to change the value of the blue, I would cut down on the amount of blue, or if you want the sky to be stronger. But if you do this too much, you'll see that you're going to get these little pixelized spots in your image, because it's the color is over exaggerated. So you may want some additional blue, or actually possibly less blue in here. And that looks, well, I haven't really done anything to it because it went back to 0, but you can see lights and darks, and that looks fine the way it is. So the main one I was concerned about was the yellow. Let's see, the green is here, so I don't really need that. Cyan's another form of blue, so you can cut down a little bit on that or increase it and see what it looks like. There's not much in there, so for hue and saturation, that's the best you can do. My favorite thing to do is use the saturation to lower certain specific colors, and that works really well if you have some colors that are out of range or color cast. But I'll go back to the master. So I usually use that, and then let's go to color balance. In color balance, we can decrease, we can go and make it redder, which we don't want to do, or we can decrease the red slightly. We can increase the blue if we want the blue to be a little bit brighter in here. We have to keep in mind that the sand needs to be a warm color. Now if you increase the green, that's going to look really strange. We go into the magenta. So I'm increasing it just slightly. But you can see that's before and after. It's not a big change. And I lost a little bit of blue in there, so I'm going to move this back slightly. And let's take a look. Okay, it looks pretty good. So you can see on these other ones, when we first started, the levels really made a big difference. The hue and saturation cut down on the brightness of the color in his face, and then the color balances out slightly. So you can adjust this a little bit more if you want to get it a little warmer. The sand looks a little warmer, so that looks good, I think. So now this process, since we're not using numeric settings for these, we're relying on our specific eyes to make these corrections and so on. So I'm going to stop the tutorial at this point, and then we'll move on to curves in the next video, and I'll show you the difference of using those. Now, the only other thing that we could possibly use in here is vibrance, and if you increase the vibrance, it's going to increase the brightness of the colors. The saturation, you can increase the saturation and it'll exaggerate it way too much. So we usually like a lot of saturation in our images now, so just be aware not to do too much. But the vibrance, you can bump that up pretty good. You can see without the vibrance what would happen. You're going to get a black and white kind of image. So we can bump that up a little bit and take a look. There's really not much difference in there. Let's see. Increase the saturation slightly. Just a slight amount because I like to see the blue in the sky. Okay, so those are the only ones that we would really want to do on this project. And notice I only have one levels layer adjustment, one hue and saturation levels adjustment, one color balance layer adjustment, and one vibrance. So what happens is people, instead of clicking on these again, they'll click on the icon for the levels or the brightness and contrast, and they'll create multiple levels. So you can see you can keep creating these, but you don't need more than one in this project or this exercise or even in the next assignment. So the only thing that I haven't used is brightness and contrast, and you can see this. I can brighten it up a little bit if I want to, or make it a little darker, and I can add more contrast or less contrast. So if you do too little of contrast, it's going to kill the image quite a bit, so you don't want to do that. So you may want to lower the contrast slightly and maybe increase the brightness a little bit. So you can see in here, even though I wasn't at the top layer, it created it here. But one of the other things is you can move your layers just by clicking on them, and dragging them up. You can see there's like a blue line. Well, a blue line will show up when you get it above the object or the other layer, and you can move those around. So you just click and drag, click and drag. So, you know, if I wanted to move this down, I can move it down here, I can move it back up, wherever I want. I can actually move these two except for the locked layer. Okay, so now I have brightness and contrast is a little bit brighter, which looks really good. So one of the things you can do is hold the Option key down and click on the image that you want to see, and what it does is it turns off all the layers that you created, and then click again and it brings them back. So you can, I'm just holding the Option key down and clicking, so you can see with or without. Now I didn't have this on, so let's do that again. There. So a huge difference, and I think that's enough for this image. The next tutorial will go over how to use curves in a more specific numeric format for creating your curves, like brightness and contrast, highlights and shadows, and color and tonal values. Okay, but for now that's it. Okay, that's all I want for this exercise. Thanks. So good luck, and I hope everything works well.